Welcome to this presentation on Chrome's process model and site isolation. This presentation was created in collaboration with Charlie Rice and the Chrome Security Architecture team. By the end of this module, you'll be able to identify an individual program on the web and describe the security benefits of dividing web content into multiple sandboxed renderer processes. This will allow you to recognize cases where a possibly compromised renderer process should not be trusted to make a decision. You'll also learn which types of attacks site isolation prevents and how the protection differs across platforms. Finally, you'll understand how to access Chrome's Task Manager to see which programs are located in which processes. This presentation was created by the Chrome Security Architecture team, also known as the CSA team, which works on the process model, provides security reviews, and offers advice to teams across Google who are looking to develop new features or otherwise modify Chrome. Whether you're a recent addition to the Chrome team or interested in talking with the CSA team about a new feature you'd like to implement, this presentation can provide you with a better understanding of how Chrome divides up web content and where you might have flexibility or constraints in the design space. As the early web grew, websites evolved from simple documents that could easily share a process into active programs. This changed the web browser's role from a simple document renderer to an operating system for programs. Modern browsers such as Chrome use multiple operating system processes to manage this workload, which improves stability, security, and performance. Chrome's process model determines how documents, workers, and other web content are divided into processes. It's designed to carefully identify which parts of a program on the web need to coexist in a single process. Knowing how programs are identified can help you understand the constraints for designing new features and the opportunities for changing process model behavior. At a high level, the Chrome team aims to use separate processes for different programs in the browser when possible. This has three main benefits. It provides stability because putting programs in separate processes limits the impact of a renderer process crash or hang and allows other content in the browser to continue working. It improves performance by allowing different programs to run in parallel with better responsiveness. However, this does require some additional memory overhead for each process. And it bolsters security because using separate processes for different websites allows significantly stronger defenses against malicious websites. At first glance, you might think that a program on the web refers to a single web page, but it's easy to assume that two different web pages are more independent than they actually are. For example, even though two pages might exist in different tabs or even windows, they might still share processes and exist within the same program within the browser, which allows them to directly share information and objects. This means that these pages would break if they were placed in different processes from each other. Alternatively, a single web page could contain multiple programs, such as a main document and a cross-site video in a subframe document. Features developed without a clear understanding of these boundaries can be more prone to crash or break, particularly if something leaks from one page into another that the engineering team had not expected or planned for. This can also lead to potential security bugs. So, a program in the browser isn't a single document or web page and its sub-resources. Instead, it's a group of same or similar origin documents that can fully access each other's contents. A normal browsing session will usually be made up of several independent programs. The boundaries between programs are based on what's allowed to be accessed as well as what is reachable. Two documents only have access to each other if they come from the same site or origin because of the same origin policy, and they can only reach each other if they are part of the same browsing context group, such as subframes and pop-ups. Browsing context groups are a set of connected windows, tabs, or subframes that share communication channels. They're connected regardless of site and can reference each other when needed. Two documents that are allowed to access each other and can reach each other are part of the same program. Site instances are used to define individual programs within the browser. A site instance is a group of documents or workers that must share a process with each other to support their needs, such as cross-document scripting. Pages in separate site instances are independent of each other. This means that site instances can be isolated from each other in different processes without disrupting existing web content. After these programs are defined using site instances, Chrome's process model can decide which programs can never share a process for security reasons, and which programs have the flexibility to share a process or not, based on performance trade-offs. This creates room to optimize Chrome's process model for performance. Now let's take a closer look at the security constraints and performance trade-offs guiding these decisions. Chrome runs all web content within low-privilege sandboxes to limit a potential attacker's access to the user's machine. The goal of site isolation is to also use the sandbox to protect websites from each other. Websites are typically not allowed to access each other's data inside the browser, thanks to code that enforces the same origin policy within the renderer process. However, sometimes security bugs are found in this code, and malicious websites might try to bypass these rules to attack other websites. Site isolation limits the damage that an attack can cause when such security bugs are found. Site isolation was developed to provide protection against two powerful types of attack. Renderer exploit attacks are where malicious websites are created by someone with knowledge of a bug in the browser. These sites can run arbitrary code within the renderer process to forge malicious IPC messages, impersonate a Chrome extension content script, or use other techniques to trick more privileged parts of the browser. Then, they can ask for more data or try to gain access to the user's other accounts on different websites. This used to be a serious security vulnerability, where these sites could reach from their evil.com frame and steal a user's cookies on other websites like Google or your bank. Another major threat within the browser comes from Spectre and other transient execution attacks. These attacks work from JavaScript or WebAssembly code that can run within the browser itself. Malicious actors can run side-channel attacks on the CPU state within the renderer process and use that to access memory addresses within the process. Without site isolation, this could even include data from cross-site iframes. This type of attack doesn't depend on any bugs being present in the browser. Users can have a completely bug-free browser and still be at risk from these types of attacks. So, it was important to find a way to ensure that even if an attacker could run a Spectre attack, they still wouldn't have access to anything worth stealing inside their process. Site isolation offers an extra line of defense against these types of attack. It ensures that pages from different websites are always put into different processes, each running in a sandbox that limits what the process is allowed to do. It also makes it possible to block the process from receiving most types of sensitive data from other sites. As a result, a malicious website will find it much more difficult to steal data from other sites, even if it can break some of the rules in its own process. With site isolation, Chrome builds walls between individual websites, rather than just between the websites and your computer. As a part of this, Chrome provides support for out-of-process iframes, which allow a subframe of a page to be rendered by a different process than its parent frame. Out-of-process iframes allow a renderer process to be dedicated to a single website, even when cross-site iframes are present. To support out-of-process iframes in Chrome, the CSA team needed to decompose the entire rendering engine to work at a frame granularity. They also had to introduce representations of remote frames, called frame proxies, that live in other processes so that web content can still send messages to them. Because of out-of-process iframes, you should never assume that you can read an entire web page, including all of its iframes, in the same renderer process. So, what else do you need to be aware of when you're developing features to reduce the potential for risks and vulnerabilities in the renderer process? Let's quickly discuss a few more examples. Firstly, if your feature needs to send information from the renderer process to the browser process, don't send the document's origin or similar state. The browser process should already know the security origin that a specific renderer process is associated with, so it shouldn't need to hear the origin they're asking for. This removes the opportunity for a compromised renderer to lie about its identity and request privileged data. Secondly, don't rely on the renderer process for security checks. It might sometimes be more convenient to only put a check in the renderer process, but attackers can often bypass these checks, so they need to be enforced in the browser process. An example of this is requiring a website to have permission before using a device's camera. If the permission check is programmed into the renderer process, an attacker can skip this check and turn a user's camera on. If the permission check takes place in the browser process, this makes it much harder for an attacker to bypass the check. It's important to note that site isolation protection levels in Chrome vary by platform. Full site isolation is available on desktop platforms for Chrome OS, Windows, Mac, and Linux. In this mode, each process is locked to documents from a single site to provide all sites protection against compromised renderers and Spectre-like attacks, without breaking backwards compatibility. On platforms such as Android, which have more significant resource constraints, Chrome only isolates processes for some sites, putting the rest in unlocked processes that can be used for any other website. There's also a threshold of about 2 GB of device RAM required to support any level of site isolation on Android. Site isolation is currently unavailable on Android WebView and iOS. So, when you're designing a feature, it's important to remember that Chrome can provide a high level of defense from bugs and potential attack with site isolation on a desktop platform, but that it won't always be available to provide the same level of protection if the feature is also being shipped to Android or iOS. When considering changes to the process model and which programs are sharing processes, there are several constraints that you need to bear in mind. Some of these constraints relate to security, such as not allowing programs from different sites in the same process. Other constraints relate to compatibility requirements, such as not putting 2 documents from the same program in different processes. Even with these constraints, some flexibility remains for making performance-related changes to which same-site programs can share a process. There are usually trade-offs in these decisions, such as using less overall memory and avoiding process creation latency when putting programs in fewer processes, versus having smaller and more responsive processes when putting programs in more processes. These decisions might be made based on context or overall conditions, such as starting to reuse same-site processes when a large number already exist. When you're deciding whether to reuse processes or how to isolate content and resources across them, it's important to consider several key factors. New features need to respect the security boundaries between processes to ensure that cross-site data doesn't leak into a process. Decisions on whether to use the same process or a separate same-site process for a new program aren't strictly better or worse for performance, but more of a trade-off between latency and responsiveness. It's important to aim for a good overall balance between the two. New feature designers must consider the lifetimes of the objects they create in the browser and renderer processes, and whether these objects might live longer than expected if shared with other documents in the same program. Object lifetime bugs can often have security implications. By understanding these constraints and trade-offs, you can more productively explore the design space for process model decisions when flexibility is available. Now let's discuss some of the tools you can use to understand how Chrome is behaving and how processes are being isolated and shared within the browser. Chrome provides several tools you can use to view the current state of the process model and understand what Chrome is doing behind the scenes. For example, if you're prototyping a new feature, these tools can be useful in helping you understand why Chrome is behaving a certain way, or what constraints might be in place. You can find Chrome's Task Manager under More Tools in the browser menu to view live resource usage for each of Chrome's processes. The Task Manager also shows which documents and workers are grouped together in a given process. You can select the task column header until the up-down triangle disappears to set the Task Manager to default sort order. In this view, processes for subframes are listed under the process for their tab when possible, although this may not be possible if subframes from multiple tabs are in a given process. For example, you could use the Task Manager to understand if the main frame of a page is in a different process from a subframe. If you want to dig deeper, the Chrome Process Internals page can provide a more powerful overview. This internal diagnostic page shows information about the site instances and processes for each open document, including which site each process is locked to. This can be valuable for identifying which pages and resources should never share processes, or which might be sharing for a performance reason, but could be relocated or adjusted to facilitate new desired behavior. You might also be prompted by the CSA team to send information from the Process Internals page if you're reporting a bug, or trying to troubleshoot a more complex process reuse question. Congratulations! You should now have a better understanding of the Chrome process model and the benefits and limitations of site isolation. With more knowledge of both the flexibility and the constraints of the process model, and how this can impact both security and performance, you can make more informed decisions when designing new features or updating code. Thank you for doing your part to help make Chrome more secure.